On today's Pats podcast, we're going to make you stronger by making you smarter. Stick around. Let's be better athletic trainers. I'd like to once again thank Rothman Orthopedics for their support of the Pats podcast and athletic trainers in the state of Pennsylvania. For more information, check them out at rothmanortho.com.
All right, I want to welcome John O'Neill to the show today. John is a close and personal friend of mine. We've known each other for quite some time now. He actually interned with me as a sports medicine student assistant. I don't even know, too many years ago, and went on to get his CSCS and is the director of performance at Cressey Sports Performance. If y'all have never heard of Cressey Sports Performance, I highly recommend you check them out. They deal primarily with overhead athletes and baseball players, and just crush it at developing elite baseball players and keeping them injury free. So that's what we're really going to focus on today, is talking about overhead athletes, arm care, and how to keep those athletes performing really high and also pain free and injury free. So John has a really unique background, so I'm going to let John take it over from here and just give us a little bit about your education, your background, and how you got to where you are right now.
Yeah, Adam, thanks for having me. Like Adam said, I've known him since I think 2010 or 2011. I started working for him in I think fall 2011. Worked through the end of college, would have been spring 2014. Stayed in touch with him since then. So it's fun to be on a podcast like this. Usually when we're talking, it's not as formal a setting. But a little bit about my background and how it applies to where I am today. Played sports growing up, like I think a lot of people in our field. Got hurt all the time, like a lot of people in our field. Started seeking answers to how to train in smarter ways, how to still train hard and stay on the field. That didn't turn so much into my own athletic endeavors, but became on the coaching side. Interning/working for Adam was more happenstance than anything. There were two available jobs for freshmen at Dickinson College, where I went. And it was either you work in the cafeteria or you work as something called the sports medicine student assistant. And as someone with my interest in sports, that job sounded a lot more enticing. So went for that, wound up getting it, wound up working like 20 to 30 hours a week my entire junior and senior year. Basically put more time into that than like anything else at school, just because Adam and I kind of hit it off. And he was the first one to introduce me to a lot of different training topics. Towards the end of college, not really sure what I wanted to do. This is 7 years ago now, but not really sure what I wanted to do, and decided to just go for it and go into strength and conditioning. I emailed probably about 40 different people in the field, people that I had read on sites like T Nation and EricCressey.com and Mike Boyle and Dan John and all these guys who are kind of like godfathers of our field, and emailed all of them like seeking career advice, just trying to see if like it was possible to go from being a math major without really a traditional background, which is what I was, into the field. And 9 out of 10 the people that I emailed got back to me, and 9 out of 10 of those people told me like, yeah, you can do it. You just got to get like good experience. You got to intern at good places. You got to really be willing to embrace like working a lot of hours and potentially unpaid. And so that's kind of what I spent the rest of 2014 after graduating doing. Interned at Brand Phone Training Systems, interned at Cressey Sports Performance. In Florida, I work at the Massachusetts one right now, but interned at one in Florida in 2014. From there, wound up working at two places before coming back to CSP, the Annex Sports Performance in New Jersey and Drive 495 in New York, both of which were really good facilities and are really good facilities to work at, especially because I had people around me to learn from. I think one thing I've tried to make a priority wherever I've been, just given the untraditional background and given how important I think a mentor, or how important I think having people around you to learn from is. Everywhere I've worked has been, around either like-minded professionals or professionals who push themselves and by default push me. And so I've really spent the last, if you count the time with Adam, 9-10 years trying to learn as much as I can in the S&C field. And that's kind of where I wound up, or how I wound up where I am today. I've been at CSP Massachusetts for 4 years now. It's actually 4 years this week, but been in my current role as director of performance for about 3 to 3.5. It was a little under a year when I got that role. And I can get into kind of what that role looks like. I just want to kind of turn it back over to you guys for questions.
Yeah, I would love, talk about Cressey Sports Performance. What is your specialty? Talk to me what the director of performance looks like, and what a typical day looks like. What kind of athletes are coming through? What your training philosophies are. Feel free to kind of touch on anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll try to cover all those questions. I think there are probably a couple within that.
Yep.
So I know most of this podcast, athletic trainers, there's definitely some overlap, in fields. It's kind of like picture a Venn diagram between PT and ATC and athletic training. There are things in your skill sets that are not in mine. There are things in mine that technically could be in yours, but I might have more experience with. There's definitely the different segments. We are pretty much all on the strength and conditioning side. We have PTs in-house, we have a manual therapist in-house, but a majority of my day is spent actually coaching. And so I'm looking at somewhere between 30 and 35 hours a week of coaching, working with athletes anywhere from age of 12 up to, I say athletes, but we have some Gen Pop people as well. Like we have a guy who's 73, 74 who comes in pretty regularly. And so we have a pretty good group of adults, but 80% of our population is baseball players between the age of like 16 and 24. Guys all the way from, freshmen, sophomores in high school through, a couple guys in the major leagues. Our Florida facility, if you look at our Instagram, is known for their work with major league players, minor league players. We are in, somewhat rural Massachusetts. And so while we do have, a pretty good stock of professional players that come through during the off season, it's 13 or 14 that come in regularly. The Florida facility is much more known for that. Within your other questions, my actual role, we have two owners. So Eric Cressey, you guys may have heard of, and then Pete Dupuis, who runs the business end. Eric spends most of his year in Florida. He spends basically the summers up here. He also has commitments with the Yankees. And so my job is basically to oversee what happens on the training floor. And so we have a full team of strength and conditioning coaches. We have 4 of them. We have a full internship program, which is anywhere from like 5 to 8 interns at a time. And so that's basically our coaching staff. It's my job to oversee not only what their jobs look like, but also programming philosophies and continuing education and organization of schedules and everything that kind of goes within that. Kind of like almost like a general manager role for a team. And so I can do parts of all of the jobs, but my job is more to oversee all of it. I still program for I probably write somewhere between 60 and 85 programs a month. Our model is based on individualization. And so that doesn't mean everybody's on like completely different programs. That means that we have the opportunity to individualize. And so versus like some college when we're group settings where everyone is on the exact same program, our model when we take people in starts with an individual assessment. We're looking at everything from basic health history to question and answer intake, trying to get the athlete's training background, what they do well, what they need to work on, what their goals are, in addition to a series of more biomechanics-based testing. So, stuff like range of motion, stuff that's more active control based, like a toe touch and a squat. Some of it, if you guys are familiar, is rooted in SFMA principles. It's rooted in PRI principles. It's rooted in, some FRC principles. There's all kinds of schools of thought that my boss Eric and our staff over the years has kind of blended into our own eval that takes somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes. And so every single athlete is going to go through that process when they come in. From there, they're going to go through kind of a baseline training session to start, and then we'll write the program after that day one. Our programs all work in 4-week blocks, and we'll have athletes complete anywhere from if we have someone for the summer, they might get 3 programs in summer. If we have someone all off season, fall, winter, we might have an athlete for 6 to 8 months. And so, but every progression, every program is based off how the athlete is progressing, how they're doing, based off the goals that we set, based off the goals that they set, and their schedule of, other activities. But that model really allows us to, I think, see a lot cleaner or more efficient progressions than a group model. And it doesn't mean if you're in a group model, you can't do something similar. But it allows us to really meet the athlete where they're at. And so people don't really fall behind or people don't really exceed their program. They're all kind of like performing where they should be with their program. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but I think I touched on the questions you had there.
Yeah. Phil, you got anything?
So I'm interested to see like more on like the philosophies, how how you're deciding the exercises, how you're implementing them, functional versus static, things like that.
Yep, absolutely. So I'll use an analogy I use with our interns. So I run our education program with our interns, and that's always kind of been an interest or a passion of mine. Both my parents were teachers, and so are teachers still. And so, like, actually how things are taught oftentimes I think is more important than what is actually being taught. And I think that everyone who, I guess most of the people on this podcast have been through higher levels of schooling at some point. It's not necessarily the information that was being taught in terms of if you retain it, it's how it was taught to you or what level of importance it was taught to you with. So having said that, we'll take like a 30,000 foot view in terms of what we're doing first, and then we'll kind of get down into the weeds of it. But everything starts with a combination of two things. So it's the individual, where they're at right now, and then the second thing is what they want to do. And so let's say, to use a specific example, I get a 15-year-old baseball player who has never lifted weights before, no injury history, just kind of the ideal eval, because it's really easy to do well with that person, right? We have to look at what are the competencies that they're going to need to play baseball at a high level. And so you basically look at it from the gold standard backwards. That philosophy of like whittling down from the end is much, much easier to comprehend, and it's much, much easier to progress people with than starting from like what is the easiest thing they can start with and progress up, because you can progress up for a long, long time. Like let's say you're starting with like really simple corrective exercises, like your go-to day one. It might be a while before the person is moving weight with any kind of load or velocity. And so we're going to start at the end point and whittle our way down. So every teenager we get, I'm going to backtrack, be like, all right, if this guy wants to be a Division I baseball player, what needs to change between now and the time he turns 18 or 19? And so for us, it's a combination of several schools of thought. There's stuff on the speed and power end, there's stuff on the strength end, there's stuff on the mobility end, there's stuff on the health end. I think it's a major concept to realize that like health and performance are not always the same thing. If we wanted people to be as healthy as possible, we wouldn't have them throw a baseball as hard as they can overhand for 60, 80, 100 innings a year. And so it's knowing what we can do to help them A, perform better, but B, keep them healthy at the same time. Our programming, in order to like walk you through what a program looks like, average session takes 75 to 90 minutes. We'll sometimes have sessions that are a lot shorter if someone is in all the time. We'll occasionally have a session that's longer if somebody is, also throwing and also doing a bunch of other things within that day. Our model, we're a 15,000 square foot gym. We have pitching cages within there. We see a very high volume of high level arms or just pitchers in general. And so our model, everybody has their own packet, their own programs. We have coaches floating around helping them at all times. They have a warm-up page. The warm-ups, are very much corrective exercise based or influence. They go into some kind of dynamic warm-up or some kind of speed and power work. From there, they might go into additional speed and power work depending on who the person is, if that's something needed to work on more, if that's something that fits their program. Med ball throws, jumps, sprints, etc. From there, it's some kind of lifting. And so, we deadlift people, we squat people, we lunge people, all like the basic heavier exercises. We don't do very much Olympic lifting with our baseball population, just from a risk reward standpoint. We haven't seen that like the ability to clean and jerk or to snatch heavier weights correlate well with our guys who are maybe looser, who need to develop good stiffness in their elbows, wrists, and shoulders. And so it's kind of is a risk reward scenario. It's also a transfer to sport scenario, whereas like vertical power probably doesn't correlate very well with baseball. We're going to train rotational power more than anything. But to backtrack to actual order of the program, it's kind of some kind of main strength section, followed by some kind of accessory strength section, and then some kind of like movement efficiency, arm care, core, something towards the end that is more like lower level. You used the word static before. We might use some static hold variations, but something that is more rooted around health and performance. And so that's kind of the arc of the session. If you think of it like an arc, it starts slow, it starts built around movement efficiency, then it gets fast, then it gets heavier, then it goes back to kind of where it started with different things. our model is built around getting people in as frequently as possible. And so, like, we're in the private sector. I'm sure a lot of people on this call are not in terms of in the school sector. And so it's probably a little different. People don't have to show up to us. There's no mandate that they have to show up. And so it is very much like, it's the private sector. It's making sure you're serving clients' needs and making sure you're doing right by the client and making sure they're engaged in the training process. And our pricing structure is set up so that it incentivizes people to be there more often. And so I write more 4 to 6 day a week programs than I do 1 to 3 day a week programs, just the way our program's set up. Like, our average client is in 3 or 4 days a week.
Yeah. So John, you touched on it. You started to kind of go down that rabbit hole. I think we got off topic, but so you said you used the example of the 15-year-old that wants to go D1. Do you have, or can you talk about maybe some of those boxes that you need to check to be that D1 athlete? Like, is there a minimal level of strength that you have identified? Is there a minimal amount of, let's use pitchers, for example, is there a minimal amount of shoulder ER versus IR? Give me some of those things that you guys at Cressey Sports Performance, really working with overhead athletes that you're specifically looking for, that you're like, okay, this guy is going to be able to throw 90 plus mile an hour and be healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start subjective, then we'll get objective. Just touching on background, things that I don't think are taught very well in the school setting is like critical thinking and logic and kind of big picture. Like, all right, where is this exercise leading, or where is it leading towards? And so I used to think my background was kind of a hindrance towards career progress. Now I think it's an advantage. Because every athlete that you get, or every client that you get, or every patient on your end that you get, is problem solving. And so the better you are at critical thinking and making decisions in real time and having a hierarchy behind your decision making, the quicker you're going to see results. And so otherwise it would just be like there'd be the same script for everyone, and there wouldn't be any. No one would listen to this podcast because we would know the exact script we do, right?
Right. Yep.
And so
here's your protocol. Just go do it.
Exactly. And I think everyone listening to this podcast has probably started to shift away from that like 1980s mindset of like, here are the exercises for the individual, regardless of who they are. And so, and probably prior to 1980, but like that's kind of the history of our industry is like, here's the sheet, go do it. And so a lot of it is critical thinking and decision making. From an objective standpoint, let's take a 30,000 foot view again. Like, it starts with just gross size. And so I know the average major league pitcher is 215 to 218 pounds. And so Division I is, obviously a little less than that. Division III varsity is going to be a derivative of that. Not a huge derivative of that, though. We're not looking at like varsity baseball players being 150 pounds. They're probably a little heavier. And so if we get a kid who is, 5'10", 150, the first thing is like, we got to put some size and strength on you. We got to put something behind what you're doing. Because strength is not a driver of performance per se, but it's more so a driver of potential for performance, right? Yep. So like, getting stronger doesn't guarantee you're going to be better, but it gives you more options to make changes down the road. And so that's number one. Like, do we need to make any size changes or strength changes? From a range of motion standpoint, I've seen a lot of different things work. That's kind of the nature of pitching and baseball. Other sports have a little more exact, like, this is kind of what you need, but because of the nature of the task, like, you guys can't see me, but guys release ball all the way overhand and all the way underhand and somewhere in the middle. And so there are a lot of different endpoints that you're trying to get to. And so it's more important to fit what you're trying to do to your body than it is to try to fit your body to the task, because the task is a little bit open-ended. But I'll give some actual ranges of motion just so people have something subjective. If a kid can't touch the toes, that's a primary one that we're going to work on. If you can backtrack the pitching delivery, so thinking back to critical thinking and this is kind of a subjective analysis, like, we have to be able to rewind the delivery. And so if you can't flex your trunk, or if you can't go and get into trunk flexion over hip flexion, you're going to have a really tough time releasing the baseball safely. And so that would be a big picture thing we're going to look at. If you can't touch toes, we're going to work on that. We're going to try to figure out why as well. Actual range of motion wise, the textbooks are probably going to tell you like 90 ER and 90 IR in the in the shoulder are norms. We basically never see that in arms of any kind of caliber. We're looking at closer to 110, 120 degrees in a throwing shoulder. IR, anything like sub 45 starts to become a little bit concerning to me, and that's something that we need to work on. But I've seen a lot of higher level guys have around there and be okay. I'm generally more concerned with overhead shoulder flexion as a marker for health, and so if someone starts to really lose overhead shoulder flexion, specifically like after they throw, and it gets worse throughout the year, so just the ability to get in supine your arm or your humerus to the table. Like if someone really starts to lose that, I consider that to be a little bit of a red flag, and we're going to try to address that. Elbow extension, same thing. Those things go hand in hand, and so elbow extension should be full, or it should be very, very close to it. A lot of times we get these guys who are older and haven't had those ranges of motion in a while, and we're not necessarily going to be able to restore those to full, at least not easily. But we're going to try to keep putting dents in that, or keep trying to prevent those from getting worse. Actual hip range of motion, the back leg hip. I've seen a lot of guys with very little back leg hip in a pitcher. The back leg hip really doesn't need that much internal rotation. So when you go to load, ideally you have some from a health standpoint, or from a performance standpoint. If you have 20, 30 degrees, you can probably get away with it. Now, if you have like 10 or less, your movement options are very, very limited. And textbooks probably tell you 40, 45 degrees is norm. We see very few high-level arms with that much or more. We occasionally will, but occasionally will just because the task is, like I said, a little bit open-ended in terms of what point you're trying to get to. The lead leg, so let's say a right-hand pitcher, the left leg when it lands, that leg should have 30 to 45 degrees of internal rotation. If it doesn't, we're looking at someone who has to kind of cut themselves off when they land, because you have to be able to rotate through that hip at release point. And so that's just, I would say probably it's a very high percentage. Let's say 75% of the programs that I've written over the last 3-4 years are pitchers, just the nature of our model. And that's, it's not necessarily, I don't know those numbers for all sports, but I will say that like if we get someone in a different sport, I'll start looking into what competencies they need. On the baseball end, we're able to look into competencies like range of motion and stuff like that with a little more depth and importance than maybe, I have some field hockey, lacrosse, and soccer players that I've had over the last couple of years. Their sport doesn't limit their range of motion in extremes like baseball might. However, with that end, we're looking a lot more at conditioning modalities and looking a lot more at like, can we make them faster? Can we make them cut more efficiently? Can we get them in the kind of shape they need to be in to play? And our model with those people is built around developing gross outputs first, and then getting to more specific conditioning towards the season. So like, I think the classic college model for like getting a lacrosse or field hockey player in shape is like just condition them year round. But for us, like if you're not fast already, you're just conditioning yourself to be slower, to be a medium speed. And so we're going to work on speed for a majority of the off season before we get into specific conditioning later on. Just because if you look at like the nature of aerobic adaptations, like you don't need a ton of time to develop those competencies, but you do need a lot of time to develop speed. So that's a little bit of a tangent, but
I was gonna say we can circle back to that because obviously that's we love to nerd out about speed and how that relates to conditioning and etc. But you hit on a couple good topics that I do want to circle back to. One, the first thing you said, just I think people, especially in the strength conditioning field, and well, I shouldn't even say that. I think more so in the health and medical field, have really started to gotten away from bodybuilding and performance and putting muscle mass on as a performance enhancer, right? Like we poo-pooed on bodybuilders, it's all functional training, et cetera. But if in reality, if you want to be a high level athlete, there is a minimal size that you have to be an elite athlete, right? Like specifically football is an easy example, right? Like if you're 150 pounds, you're not going to be a lineman. Like it's not how it is, right? So like that, I don't think people understand that too. And from the literature, if you look at body composition specifically as well, that's an injury risk factor that nobody ever talks about. And it drives me nuts, right? Like everybody wants to dance around about body composition because, I think people get sensitive about, oh, well, we don't want to call somebody fat. I don't want to call somebody fat either. But if you look at the literature, body composition plays a role in injury prevention. So if you're carrying around too much, excess body weight, it could potentially make you injured, right? So body composition, size, I think is really important. Can you maybe talk about how you put size on athletes without restricting their mobility, right? Because I do think you can, if you do it wrong, you can actually make them move less efficiently. And maybe talk a little bit about your so that one, how you do it at Cressey Sports Performance and keep mobility and not get them injured. And then two, maybe talk about youth athletes and their nutrition and some tricks and stuff that you use with youth athletes to help them gain weight.
Yeah, absolutely. So trying to decide where I want to start this one because I got a bunch of thoughts. But so I guess the first thing is it doesn't need to be fancy, but it needs to be done well at a young age. And so the higher level of training age you are, the more specific the exact modalities you're trying to use or improve upon are. At a young age, you just need to do things well and be consistent. And so like I talked about our model kind of breeding consistency, because I know that if we get a kid in 4 days a week, it's going to be better for the kid than if we get him in 2 days a week. Regardless, the 2 day a week program could be the perfect 2 day a week program, and the 4 day a week program could be let's say a B level program. Obviously, we're trying to write the best program we can all the time, but not every program is perfect because it's all educated guesswork prior to it happening, right? And so the 4 day a week B program is going to produce better results than the 2 day a week A program. Okay, so like getting kids consistent and getting them to buy into the process. A lot of actually putting size on is and losing weight, anything to do with actual body composition or body weight changes is to do what you do has to do with what you're doing the other hours in the week. I think it's 168 hours in a week, right? And so let's say we get a kid 6 hours a week. It's 4 90-minute sessions. If that kid isn't really into training and isn't bought into training, he's not going to go home and like crush a protein shake and have a big meal and then make sure he has breakfast the next morning. He's going to be like, all right, like I got that one done. Now let me move on to the next activity I don't want to do. And so like there has to be enjoyable in some way. So that's the biggest thing. Like we're trying to create people who are really into training, right? And really buy into the process because those people are going to see the best results. We do some actual body weight tracking or monitoring, just depending on the population and the person, where the kids like have to weigh in every week. And I know that was even, I remember at school, like that was big in the college end as well. So that I think is valuable for some kids, connect more with that objective. Like I need to make sure that I'm not down in weight next week. Right. And so that matters. But I guess the big picture is like, get people in the door frequently. Okay. Get them to buy in and enjoy the process and buy into the other things that facilitate better progress in the weight room. We're spoiled because like Adam, I know you've been in our gym, but like if you walk into our gym, like 80+, 90+% of people are into training. They're like, all right, this is cool. Like, and so you don't get like a lot of people who are like, I hate being here. The ones you do are like kids who their parents force them to come. And they don't really have the desire to play at a higher level or to, better themselves as best they can. And so I think where that comes into play, this is very similar to like coaching or working with teams. Like if you are influencing the thought leaders or the more important or the cooler quote, cool, I'm doing quotes for people not that can't see us, but if you're influencing those people to do the things that you want people to do, or it could be the higher level performers. So like, I know if we get seniors in high school that are really bought in, our freshmen become more bought in. And so if you're influencing those people really well, the people who are kind of on the fence or not sure if that's what they want to do are also more bought in. They're like, all right, well, I don't want to be that guy who's different than them. So I'm going to try to be like them. And so you don't have to necessarily try to influence every kid at the exact same rate. You've got to kind of read the room and be like, here's the kids I need to push because these kids will start to follow. And so that's kind of, that's with everything, but specifically your question about, body comp changes and size and, a lot of it's just getting kids in the door, making sure they enjoy it, making sure that they're bought into the process outside the gym as well. We do offer some nutrition services. It's not our bread and butter. Like, it's not what, it's an add-on to our package, in terms of you can sit down and go over nutritional stuff with one of our guys on staff who specializes in that. But that is more of an add-on than you have to do this in our facility.
Yep. So I'm hearing mostly with that age group, it's probably just about culture and buying in and consistency.
Yep.
There's no magic tricks. It's just
absolutely
eat some food and actually come to the gym and work hard.
And that goes right hand in hand with kind of like one of our bigger picture philosophies that is unspoken. It's not like we have it written on the wall or anything, but our goal setting is more process oriented than it is outcome oriented. And so you guys may have heard those terms at some point. Like an outcome goal would be like, I need to throw 5 miles an hour harder, which is the goal of a lot of kids we have. However, we're not monitoring their progress for that as well, you threw 1 mile an hour harder this week and 1 this week, so you're almost there. We're monitoring it as, well, if you want to do that, you got to train 3-4 days a week. You got to throw with our pitching coach. You got to be consistent. This program has to be finished in 4 weeks like it was designed. It shouldn't take 5 or 6. And you've got to start eating better. You've got to make sure you're getting to sleep, not playing video games all night, et cetera, right? Yep. So those are the things. And then we've seen over time that, like, if we can accomplish those things, which are all process oriented, then the outcome oriented goals start to fall in line.
Yep. Yeah, no, I get that. So it's more about creating that culture again, creating habits, creating, like you said, the process of becoming an elite athlete. And if you can knock those down at an early age, hopefully that adherence stays throughout the rest of your life, and you're going to continue to see those performance gains.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting is, like, we are I should have mentioned this earlier. I think I may have, but we're what's called a semi-private model. So it's you're not one-on-one, you're not group, you are individual program with coaches around you. We operate anywhere from 3. We're technically under 5 to 1. A high majority of the time, we're anywhere from like 2 to 4 clients to coaches. So our sweet spots around 3 to 1. Our clients who it's the hardest to get to buy in are the clients who never train when it's busy. It's a really interesting phenomenon. And so, like, you would think that, like, oh, these clients who always come when they get like a 1-to-1 ratio are the ones who get the best results. It's not at all, because those clients, they don't have like role models around them. They don't have like people who are like, oh, I want to be like that guy. They don't see a kid maybe deadlifting 405 and they're like, oh, that's something I should strive towards. And so the clients who come when it's kind of busy are the clients who actually see the best results because they're pushed by the environment and the culture.
Absolutely. Cool. Hey, let's circle back to the range of motion. So those numbers that
I'm interested on that one.
Yeah. So I think this is really, stuff that ATs can really take away. So the numbers and the tests that you talked about, let's just preface that those are that information is anecdotal from you, right? Like, how long have you been working with at Cressey Sports Performance? You said 4 years.
4 years. I've probably done. I actually have no idea how to calculate it. It's probably 1,000 to 1,500 evals.
Yeah. So you have and if you want to, you can go into into your assessment process. You touched on a little bit, but I know what your assessment looks like. So I know you're testing range of motion on the table. So you're checking IRs, ERs, flexion, extension at the hips and the shoulders. So you see these numbers. You're working with athletes from, like you said, 12-year-olds all the way up to Major League Baseball. You are a math major. I just want to give everybody this picture. So John is a math major. He's like a savant brain. Like he's very nerdy. So he puts these calculations into perspective for me all the time. So it's really helpful, even though it's not literature based, right? This is anecdotal. This is what he sees in real life with his athletes that he's seeing on a daily basis. And these are like I said, all the way from high school athletes up to professional athletes. So that being said, we painted the picture. You're missing some of these ranges of motion, right? One, what are you doing about that then, right? So what are some of your strategies to work on this range of motion that they might not have? Are you just stretching and strengthening, or do you have a different philosophy towards that? And then 2, if your strategies don't work, when do you feel like, because you said about having a physical therapist and a manual therapist on board in-house, when do you feel like that's necessary to ship them out to them to regain that in a more formal setting, I guess I'll call it?
Yeah, let me use the latter first, and then I'll backtrack the latter question. But in the presence of pain, specifically active pain, that's a referral. Could I guess my way through something? Sure. Should I be doing that with a paying client? Absolutely not. Right. And so it's a referral. Typically, what will happen in our model is it'd be referred to PT or LMT, depending on the scenario. And then PT will kind of contraindicate some things, send back our ways for what we can and can't do. And so that's I think the way it should work in all settings. I think it's kind of almost a shame that a lot of like sport coaches are like, oh, you can work around that, when in reality, like, we know that the body is, it's a tensegrity structure, right? And so if your right shoulder is hurting, it actually might affect how your left hip is moving, right? So everything is interconnected. So it's not like, oh, this is hurt, just train this part. It's not always that simple. Sometimes we can rule that out, but we need a educated practitioner to kind of guide us that way. And so that's the first thing. Can you refresh me on the other part of the question?
Yeah. So no, it's okay. I
range of motion stuff. Right?
I was rambly. Yeah. I just wanted to kind of paint the picture for the audience first that, you gave us all these numbers and no, those numbers aren't from the literature. Those numbers are from your experience working with very specific athletes. And then, how do you remedy that? Like you're obviously doing this big assessment. What's next step for you? If they're not in pain, what are you going to do?
Sure. So I explain to our interns this way, like our assessment protocols are a luxury, not a necessity. Like we test between 20 and 30 different things in a 20, 25-minute process. Everything from, hip and shoulder range of motion, like you talked about, to active screens like a toe touch, a squat, different lunge variation, ankle mobility, et cetera, right? And so we're looking at a bunch of different things. Our actual sheet that we're filling out is 20, 25 tests. Or it's in that neighborhood. I think it's actually 20, 24, 25. But we're looking at a bunch of different things. We're looking for things that are maybe aberrant or abnormal. And so in order to know that, like I always harp on this to our interns, but you have to have like these normative range of motions memorized. And if they're not memorized, you have to be able to quickly look them up. Like you can't look at abnormal and call it abnormal unless you know normal, right? So that's just a life principle more than a range of motion principle, right? And so you have to know norms and then jot everything down, and look for SFMA or FMS principle, sorry, it's not FMS, it is a SFMA principle. They always talked about like training. I got this from you 9 years ago probably, but they always talked about chasing the DNs first. All right. And so look for things that are dysfunctional and not painful. So just try to work on those first. And from a actual, like, what do we do with it standpoint, there's kind of two ways to look at this. There's the bottom up and the top down. The bottom up is like, all right, you don't have this range of motion. What is the lower intensity modality that I can do for you that may help with it? So you don't have overhead shoulder flexion. Maybe I try to stretch a lat to keep it like pretty binary or pretty straightforward for the audience. So that would be like, you don't have this, try this. Okay. The other flip side of that is in our role, where I think a lot of strength and conditioning professionals or professionals or industry as a whole don't necessarily look at it this way, is like, let's say somebody doesn't have that overhead shoulder flexion. Well, I've got to be able to contraindicate a bunch of things in the weight room because of that, right? Yep. And so, like, if somebody is, minus 20 degrees of overhead shoulder flexion, and I decide, like, deadlift is a good exercise, right? We believe in deadlifting. It's good for putting on size and power and strength, et cetera. However, you're just driving more tension into lats and into scaps and downward rotation. And so that might be a bad idea for the person if you decide that overhead shoulder flexion is important for their skill set or than for their sport or for the skill set that they want. Yep. The more obvious one would be like a pull-up would be a bad idea. Overhead pressing might be a bad idea because they don't necessarily have that range of motion. So they're going to have to cheat and get it from somewhere else. So an overhead press is a simple one to picture for people, I think. So if I can't get their supine on a table, supine would be gravity assisted passively, right? I'm moving someone's arm into it. I'm not going to be able to do it standing without arching my back and putting pressure on my spine or doing something funky, bending at the knees or kind of cranking my head back to get there. And so those things like that, I think strength and conditioning coaches need to be aware of. And if they're not, like your lower intensity modalities, your stretching, your manual therapy, your soft tissue work, whatever it is, stuff like that isn't going to make changes that you want to make, because things that drive changes include load and velocity, right? So load and velocity those things are going to drive faster changes than things that don't include load or velocity. And so if we are doing things with load and velocity that are inappropriate for the person's joint positions or their actual hardware, like what they have available, you're actually going to counteract the changes you're trying to make on the other end. My guess is a lot of athletic trainers are like nodding their head and being like, I've done all this lower intensity stuff, and then I send them off to people in my profession, I send them off to the sport coach, and it goes right back to where it was, because they don't have shoulder ER and they're trying to back squat, or they can't get into lumbar flexion at all on a toe touch, and then you try to deadlift them and they experience 1 degree of lumbar flexion and it strains their back. So there's a bunch of things like that where we've got to be able to see top down and bottom up. Our model, actual training, like we do stuff on both ends. So we've got to be able to attack things from the lower intensity side, using stuff that is rooted in corrective exercise and rooted in driving good or favorable joint positions, mixed with our actual lifting and speed and power side of the program has to fit what the person has. And so I may have gotten this concept for you, so I apologize if I don't credit you, but I don't know where some of the things I've heard are from originally, but this concept of like hardware and software. So like hardware is how things are actually built, and software is how it's used. Your software has to line up with your hardware. So software is like actual training choices, what you do with your body in motion. The hardware is how it's actually built.
So what I'm hearing is your assessment is really taking exercises off the table more so than adding exercises to your program. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I don't know if it's more one than the other. I think it's both ends.
Both? Okay.
Probably. I've never really thought of it as like it's this, not this.
Yeah.
Because I think it's both at the same time. But I think a lot of time you do start with like, all right, this is ideally what I would do with somebody like this, and then you take exercises off the table based off what you see.
Yeah.
Based off what you see in the assessment.
Yeah. So the assessment is good, and you need to get rid of that interference, right? You're not going to gain any mobility if you're programming exercises that are going to interfere with your ability to increase that mobility. So I know, again, just knowing your model better than most. Talk a little bit about your warm up and how your assessment drives your warm up, what that looks like. Because I do think, I am very anti, and I'm not speaking for Pats. I am speaking for Adam Richard right now, but I'm very anti stretch and strengthen, like old school, right? Like I think there's a lot more to proximal stability to drive distal mobility. I think, just stretching tissues for long periods of time just doesn't get us where we want to, and rarely gets us where we want to. I think you agree with that. Maybe just talk a little bit about that, because I don't think as many athletic trainers are getting away from the traditional protocol-based stretch this, strengthen that yet. And I would just love to hear your mindset on that, especially working with professional baseball players.
Yeah. I'm using the term stretch before as like this loose kind of like summarizes warm-ups, and so I am glad that you clarified that. The concept of like proximal positioning, driving distal mobility is definitely rooted in all of our all of our warm-ups are rooted in that, and so we're trying to drive good core and rib cage over pelvis positioning to help improve distal positioning like shoulders and hips and elbows and knees, etc. But our warm-ups are, they have a flow to them. They're ground to standing. They're simple to complex. They, might start with some positional breathing or stuff that is going to try to drive proximal positioning first. And then they're going to get into active control of those ranges of motion. So I'll give an example, like maybe some kind of breathing variation that's meant to drive hip internal rotation is followed up with some kind of lunge or like lateral step down or step up variation that is meant to own that range of motion. And so it is very much layered in that way. And so we're trying to I talked about like this idea of a curve in a session. So you start like slow and simple, and then it curves up to faster and more complex. Then you get into speed and power and strength stuff. But the warm-ups are very much in that order. So I want to be able to help drive range of motion passive changes, followed by owning it actively through the later warm-ups. And we're looking at probably between like 6 and 10 warm-up exercises for people, 6 to 10 warm-ups, with 3 to 5 of those being like, this is for the person, and 3 to 5 of those being like, all right, these are good general warm-ups that will help layer our specific warm-ups. And so we'll occasionally use stuff that maybe looks more like stretching, but for the most part, it's more positional breathing, followed by, which will help with passive range of motion, help by doing something more active or more motor control based that'll help own that range of motion. And then from there it gets into, dynamic movement and moving with some kind of speed.
Perfect. Yeah. Phil, you got anything? I don't want to take over the show.
I don't know. I'm just enjoying seeing Adam geek out over this. This is definitely a topic that Adam is enjoying. So really, the thing that interests me is back in my day when I used to work with action sports, specifically BMX, there was that BMX posture that you never touched. It was that rounded over back, because once you start straightening out their back, they can no longer fit on that little kid bike. And you had kind of alluded with your shoulder range of motion that, you're looking for 120 degrees external rotation. I can barely get 90. How much of performance increase do you notice going back, moving that range of motion from 90 to 90 back to 120 to 45? And then how far do you notice, can you get too far where you start notice like a decrease in performance?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I just gave those like general rules. We see a lot of 120 to 70 and 130 to 60 and stuff like that. And so those are just top of mind kind of general rules of like kind of baseline, like, all right, if you can't do this, you might not be able to perform at a high level. I don't know if I have a specific answer for you, but kind of where my mind is going with your question. We have pitching coach in-house. Pitching coach in-house is a trained strength coach to intern with us, and they always have been. And if you look at our business, like our first pitching coach is the major league pitching coach of the Yankees, and the last 3 are all in pro ball, and the guy who's here right now is probably going to be in pro ball in a year or 2 as well. So they are really, really good at what they do. And I don't try to mess too much with things that are going to change mechanics. I just try to feed them information so they're better at coaching people, if that makes sense. And so I think a bad sport coach can do more harm than a good strength coach can do good, if that makes sense. And so you can really drive people into the wrong positions, maybe positions that they don't necessarily have, if they're coached really, really poorly, especially at like high speeds or high loads. Whereas like a lot of times if we don't deal with someone who, or if we're dealing with someone who maybe is being coached really poorly, like we're just fighting an uphill battle to try to either maintain changes or try to just give them enough on the health side so that they can stay healthier for longer. And so I don't know if I have the exact window. I definitely know that like more range of motion isn't always better. It might actually change the skill side of it. And so if you think about from like a motor skill side, like we have these like really stable, patterns for high level performance of what they do. And when we increase range of motion without also coaching the skill in a way that is lined up with that increased range of motion, we actually create instability in the pattern. And so, like I'll use the example of use BMX. I've never worked with a BMX person, but I'll use the example of like you see these people who you go to like commercial gym, you see these people like in their 50s and 60s who like lift with horrible technique, and you're like, how does that person not get hurt? But in reality, they're just really stable within their patterns. Their patterns aren't how you perform at a high level, but they're really stable within their patterns and actually changing how they do things and are changing their range of motion, or drastically changing range of motion, then not changing how they try to do their sport or do their skill or do the lift, whatever they're trying to do, is actually maybe very unsafe for them. And so you've got to make sure that your range of motion changes are lining up with how the skill is being performed. And for us, like, if you look at the course of a kind of an annual year for a player, it doesn't really matter the sport. Range of motion changes or like broad changes like that, we're really trying to make 2 periods of the year. It's 1, early off season, so we have a lot of time, or 2, they're dealing with some kind of pain or something that we need to get them away from it. Those are the biggest windows of we're going to really try to change range of motion. If somebody's in season and they're a little bit limited, but it's not painful, we're not going to try to like make a drastic change. That would potentially like set them up for an unstable pattern that they don't necessarily have the motor control of. So that's just kind of broad picture thoughts on that question.
I like that answer.
Yeah. No, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? Like if you increase range of motion that you don't have control over, then obviously that's going to be unstable range of motion, right? I want to talk about arm care specifically, what you guys recommend. Before we go down that hole, there was another question I was gonna ask you based off what you just said. So we've talked about this, and I don't know if this is something we can talk about now, or you actually have enough anecdotal numbers for this. But you've discussed with me arm slots and range of motion.
Yeah.
Do you want to touch on that at all?
Yeah, 100%. So coaching everybody into the same arm slot is a really bad idea. That's number one. Mainly because like when a kid chooses to throw from a lower arm slot naturally, it's not because they just got lazy, right? It's generally because that's where their arm moves most efficiently. And if we look at like the major leagues or look at higher level performance, like a high majority of people don't actually throw overhand. They kind of throw from like what they call in baseball, like a 3/4 slot, a high 3/4, a low 3/4. Their trunk is moving out of the way to get them into that position. And so we use the external rotation example. We've actually had a lot of success with kid comes to us with like, oh, my shoulder gets sore when I throw. Let's check out the shoulder. They have 90 degrees of ER. And it's like, well, where do you try to throw from? And they say over the top. My coach wants me to be over the top. And it's like, well, you don't actually have the range of motion to get there. So that makes sense that your shoulder hurts. Like, what if you try to drop your arm slot by as little as like 1 to 2 inches? And it's like, oh, my shoulder doesn't hurt. Like, okay, well, let's keep throwing from there. And so a lot of those guys, the higher level, will have more horizontal abduction. So on a table, like going straight arm straight towards the ground, more horizontal abduction relative to ER. Like they're above average on abduction, they're below average on ER. And they should throw from a slightly lower slot. Now we see a lot of like the guy, without mentioning names, that has a lot of abduction and actually throws over the top in terms of where the ball is released, but it's because he has this crazy lateral trunk tilt that puts the ball there. So look at not this guy because I don't actually know him, but if you look at like Aroldis Chapman, a lot of this call is probably heard of. The ball is released relatively over the top, but look at his hand to opposite shoulder line. It's actually kind of a straight line. So if you just put his upper body upright, he would kind of be throwing sidearm. So,
yep.
So a lot of times, like that's where like having a good skill coach comes in, but also educating the kids to be advocates for themselves. Like if you, if you have a kid and you feel strongly like, hey, that position might hurt you, tell them like, hey, like you should slightly change the way you're going about this. So that's kind of just really quick, mostly anecdotal.
Right.
Anecdotal, but also logical. Like if you don't have the range of motion, don't try to use it.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what we already talked about with not forcing you into ranges of motion in the gym, right? So same thing here. If you've identified somebody doesn't have the mobility to pitch in that arm slot, then don't force them there, right?
And there's so the other example too, which you probably see a lot in field sports, is like there are guys who are quicker. I'll use basketball as an example because basketball is probably the easiest sport to picture a side shuffle. There are guys who are quicker, taller, based off their anatomy. And so like forcing everybody, like getting this low defensive stance actually might prohibit some guys from being fast because because you're going to be faster in like mid-range, in kind of these sweet spots or mid-range of motion. if you jam somebody into like if the listeners like stood up and went into their bottom range of their squat, wherever that was, and then tried to be quick, they're not going to be good at it, right? You got to be in a mid range. And so like some of these taller, longer guys who are higher level basketball players, and the same is true in other sports as well that require you being low on defense, are better off being a little taller.
Yeah.
And so but the way it's coached at the youth levels is like, low man wins or get as low as you can, and it's not necessarily advantageous for kids. Now there's a range. You can't be standing upright, right? But you have to kind of figure out what the sweet spot is based off how you're built.
Yeah.
As a taller guy, I appreciate that comment. I was the one that was always told, get lower, and I never could.
Just couldn't do it.
Nope.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's not that you're not trying, right? That goes back to like how things are taught, not what is being taught. It's how things are taught, and these blanket cues of everybody should do this way is not really accurate. Like I think coaches at the youth level have to set up environments just to let kids figure out what they're better at. So things like small-sided games and things like making things reactive. Small-sided game would be like in basketball going 3-on-3 instead of 5-on-5, or creating more constraints to it. Just let kids kind of play and figure out what their strengths are. And then as a coach, observing that and be like, all right, well, this is a kid who looks better when he does that. And so like there's so many. I see more on the baseball side than any other sport. There's so many kids on the baseball side that are just told like you have to throw over the top, and then their shoulder hurts, and in reality their arm slot should just be 2 inches lower.
Yep.
Let them figure it out. Monitor their discomfort level and make small incremental adjustments till they find it. I like it.
Yeah. I think the theme of the show, and hopefully people are picking up on this, is that nothing is one size fits all, right? You have to have an assessment. Everybody's going to need to be individualized to some degree. It doesn't have to be 100% everybody to have something different, but at the same time, you do need to individualize it. That being said, talk to me about arm care. Again, this is not going to be something that is you can just individualize or that you can just blanket prescribe, but if you could, or just give us some general themes of what you guys do or what y'all do at Cressey for arm care. You know what I'm talking about. Give me some arm care tips and tricks.
Absolutely. So the analogy I'll use with a bunch of things, okay, will be like if you ask somebody like, is chicken good for you? Okay. And people are probably like, this has nothing to do with arm care, but it will. Is chicken good for you? People will be like, yeah, chicken's good for you. And it's like, all right, well, 20-piece McNugget at McDonald's, is that good for you? And it's like, no, of course not. Like,
no, but it's delicious.
Yeah, it's maybe the best thing ever created. But no. So it is, arm care is no different than other parts of training in that it is how you do it, the quality of what you do, not necessarily the quantity of what you do. And so the way we coach, let's say, if anyone's in the baseball world, like they have, bands are really popular in baseball. It generally provides proprioception in favorable positions for kids. It also provides like local tissue temperature and blood flow to areas that they're going to use. So I think even if you use them incorrectly, that kids might feel like they feel better after using them for those reasons. However, the way we're going to coach stuff like that is everyone's going to get like 2 to 4 band exercises that they do really, really well before they throw. And that's more important to us than doing like 10 really poorly. And I'm not talking like 2 or 3 for like 20 reps each. I'm talking like, let's say 3 for 1 set of 8 each, and then you move on. And so it is very much a quality over quantity approach on that front. In terms of in the gym or what we try to work on, I think of things as proximal distal, closed chain to open chain. So doing things with the rib cage in good position. Rib cage is going to in a pitch and delivery, and I didn't invent this, but deliver the scap. The scap's going to deliver the arm's going to deliver the ball, right? And so doing things that promote good rib cage position, good scapular positioning first, both in closed and open chain. So closed chain would be like, different quadruped or crawling variations or push-up variations as well. An open chain would be, stuff like, your more traditional like overhead shoulder flexion and wall slides and, even rows and stuff like that. Rows creating some kind of distraction force. But from there, so we're talking scap there. From there, we're talking actual shoulder itself. So going proximal distal. working on being really strong in specific positions. And so we'll do a lot of isometric work at end range external rotation. We will do some eccentric control from external rotation into internal rotation because it's specific to the sport. It's not to say we won't do stuff like sideline or won't do stuff in different positions, but we're going to try to make as much of our shoulder stuff as specific as we can. And then from there, even stuff like, making sure the elbow is functioning correctly. So getting, into extension and pronation and flexion and supination as you move, which is going to mimic throwing action. Stuff as simple as like, if you're going to do arms, like triceps and biceps, do them really well. Like do them with intent and do them with full range of motion. And like nobody plays a higher level because they can move more weight on a bicep curl, but we have our higher level arms do some stuff like curls and triceps with lighter weights with full range of motion. And so just talking kind of backtrack there, but like pre-throwing, pick a couple things, do them really well. Weight room or what you do throughout the year, train your rib cage in a good position, move your scapular in a good position, so protraction, upper rotation. Train the glenohumeral joint or the shoulder in specific positions, both isometrically and with eccentric control, and then train the elbow and the wrist in, flexion, extension, pronation, supination. So that's kind of backtrack there. Like if normative positions of those and positions that they're going to need on the mound, you can backtrack what you need to do with the arm in the weight room.
So
that's kind of
how important is rotator cuff strengthening to you?
It's valuable. It's valuable. I'm not gonna say it's not valuable.
Give me your real opinion. Don't sugarcoat it.
I'll put it this way. I think a lot of people think it's more important than it is because they skip a lot of steps. I'll put it that way. And so unless you are checking off a bunch of other boxes, like that can't be your primary thing that you do. Right? It has to be part of a comprehensive program. And so what I mean by that is like, if you're only doing rotator cuff specific work and you're not actually training, you're not doing push-ups and rows and doing core specific stuff that's putting your abs in a good position and not moving your scaps in a good way, and not also loading your lower half in some way. Because if my guy gets more force out of his legs than yours does, and they throw the same speed, well, your guy has a lot more brunt on his arm than mine does, right? And so, or has to take on a lot more of the force with his arm. So it has to be part of a comprehensive program. Like it is included in all of our programs, but none of our programs are just this, or just anything, but specifically like arm care specific stuff.
Yeah. I just wanted to get you to, talk a little bit about, obviously, rotator cuff and low trap strength is important to shoulder health, but like you said, it's not the only thing that you have to look at. It's not something you can do in isolation to have a healthy shoulder.
Exactly. If you're doing it in isolation, it's like icing on the cake. Yeah. It's not the whole thing itself.
Yeah.
And we have guys who, in our off season are training 6 days a week for 75, 90 minutes at a time. So yeah, like those guys are definitely getting some cuff and low trap specific stuff, like you said. But our kids who are training twice a week and have never lifted a weight, like that's not the top of the mountain. Yeah.
Yep. Great. Love it. Phil, what else you got? Anything?
I think that's a good show right there.
Yeah. So we usually do a little lightning round, John. But they're usually more specific. I was gonna say they're more specific to athlete trainers. So I just came up with a couple random ones that I'm gonna throw at you right now that are funny. It might be inside joke funny, but I'm gonna do it anyway. So, John, name a few foods, or at least one food that you've never eaten.
Okay. So you asked this at a very good time. So I'm going to a bachelor party in 2 weeks. And I promised my friends I would try 1 to 3 foods that I've never had, depending on the level of difficulty for me to want to eat it. And so I created a list for them of 40 foods that I've never had.
Oh my God, there's 40.
Some of them I've tried recently because I'm like, all right, I'm going to eliminate this from the list myself. I just had watermelon for the first time last week.
Oh my God.
I've never had soup.
I was gonna say, really, I just wanted to know what's your beef with soup?
I've never had a condiment other than ketchup and barbecue sauce, like no ranch or anything else you can name. And so there's a lot of stuff like that. But I don't even know where to start with that question because I can go in a million different ways.
No. I just wanted to pick on you because I know your food choices are very small, so we'll stick to that. But
a lot of people always tell me, but a lot of the foods people want me to try, like they literally look and smell disgusting. So I have no interest in trying.
All right, so I said that you're a savant and you're a math nerd and you memorize all this stuff. So I'm just gonna pick a random World Series and see if you can tell me who won it. Do you think you can do it? So 19.
Very easily, actually, but yeah, keep going.
Oh, that's what I figured. All right, so how about 1973? Who won the World Series?
1973, the A's won the World Series. No doubt.
I love it.
They won in 72, 73, and 74. They beat the Mets in a 7-game series in 73.
This guy's crazy. He loves stats. All right, while he's looking that up, current fitness goal.
Good question. I'd like to squat 500 pounds at some point. It's not the end-all be-all goal. I'm not training specifically for that. The more specific goal is just finish my current program because it's kind of hard. Just get through all of it. But I'd like to do something crazy like that. I don't know what the next goal is. I haven't had one specific goal in a while. I still train hard. I like to train hard. It's probably oftentimes the most enjoyable part of the day. So, but train 4 days a week. Try to move heavy weights with some moderate degree of athleticism, but more so on the heavier lifting end for sure right now.
Perfect. Phil,
I have to report Wikipedia was wrong, but Baseball Reference does say that Oakland won over New York.
Perfect.
Yep.
4-3.
Love that. All right, last one. How many times have you run Mass 2?
That's actually what I was referring to.
Is that what you're on right now?
Yeah, I just finished week 8 this morning actually, but I have run Mass 2 or a variation of somewhere between 10 and 13 times.
Jeez.
I have finished it 6 times.
Okay.
So
for the audience out there, Mass 2 is a strength training program from Pat Davidson. It's extremely hard and just beats you up, but it's really good. It gets you jacked, it gets you strong. I'm
legitimately 40 to 45 pounds thicker than I was when I started.
Dang.
Granted, nice. I've done it like a lot over the last 5 years, but it's hard, it's fun. I like it because it is it's a challenge every time. It is something different than what I normally coach. So I know there are some people in the industry who like coach the programs they write. I have do the programs they write. I have no interest in training like a teenage baseball player, like 0. And so my training is a little different. I enjoy it, but definitely have gotten beat up sometimes from it and haven't finished it. But looking to finish it for the 7th time later this year, in a couple months. Yeah.
Perfect. Good luck.
Yeah.
Well, John, you've been awesome to chat with, and I just want to say a serious thank you to you for taking your time to share your expertise with us and our audience. If viewers have any questions and want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Yeah, my Instagram is O'Neill Strength. I have been told that I say the word strength in a weird way. I have something with the GTH in speech that I cannot pronounce, but you guys should all be able to figure out the word. But at O'Neill Strength. If you DM me, I'll be able to get back to you. That's probably the easiest way. And I'm happy to, come on again or do whatever with you guys. This was a lot of fun. So let me know if there's any way I can share it or do whatever. All right.
Yeah, perfect, John. Thank you again. And I want to say a huge thank you to Rothman Clinic for sponsoring this episode. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. Remember to like, subscribe, share, tweet, post, comment, and DM. Until next time, I'm Adam Richmond.
And I'm Philip Hensler.
And this was the Pats Podcast. Perfect.
Nice.
Awesome.